The storm was brewing in his heart, a storm fueled by years of anger and resentment. His name was Ethan, a man whose life had been torn apart by betrayal and deceit. For as long as he could remember, he had been wronged, hurt, and left alone to pick up the pieces. But there was one person who had caused it all: Claire. He could never forget the day she walked into his life, her smile innocent, her eyes full of promise. What he didn't know then was that she would become the catalyst for his destruction. It had started out simple enough. They were colleagues, just two people in a bustling city, unaware of the impact they would have on each other. But Ethan had always been a man of ambition, someone driven to succeed at any cost. He worked hard, pushing himself and those around him to reach the top. Claire, on the other hand, was kind, gentle, and trusting. She was the type of person who believed in the goodness of people, who saw the best in others, no matter how flawed they were. For a time, their paths crossed without much consequence. They would exchange pleasantries at work, laugh over coffee breaks, and go about their lives. But Ethan's mind, constantly consumed with the hunger for success, began to notice things about Claire, things that set her apart. She was beautiful, intelligent, and most of all, she had the kind of effortless charm that drew people to her. He found himself unable to escape the pull of her presence. Ethan's attraction to her grew over time, but so did his jealousy. It was a jealousy that consumed him, gnawed at him from within. He couldn't stand the way people looked at her, the way she could light up a room with a simple smile. To him, she was everything he could never be. And that, more than anything else, made him despise her. The turning point came when Ethan learned of Claire's secret. She had been promoted ahead of him, a decision that he couldn't understand. How could she, someone so naive, so trusting, take a position that he had worked so hard for? He had put in the hours, sacrificed his time, and yet it was her name on the promotion letter, not his. That's when the resentment took root, deep and unshakable. It was no longer about the job. It was about something deeper, something that gnawed at him with every passing day. His thoughts darkened, twisted by the jealousy that now clouded his every action. He couldn't let it go. The idea that Claire had somehow stolen what was rightfully his consumed him completely. He began to isolate himself from her, even though their work required them to interact. Every glance she sent his way, every word she spoke, felt like a reminder of the injustice he had suffered. But what made it worse was the realization that Claire had no idea of the storm brewing inside him. She continued to live her life, oblivious to the fact that her very existence had become the source of his misery. She was blissfully unaware of how her success had turned into his personal defeat. Ethan couldn't help but feel betrayed. Betrayed by the system, by those around him, and most of all, by her. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear. He would make her pay. He would ruin everything she held dear, just as she had unknowingly ruined him. The thought was all-consuming, like an itch he couldn't scratch, and in the silence of his apartment, late at night, Ethan swore to destroy her. It wasn't just about getting even anymore. It was about asserting his dominance, about making sure that no one, especially Claire, could ever look down on him again. He was no longer the man who had once admired her from a distance. No, he was a man bent on revenge, and he would stop at nothing to see it through. His mind raced as he began to plan. He would ruin her reputation, take away everything that made her shine. The more he thought about it, the more his hatred grew. He could feel it deep in his bones, an insatiable need to see her suffer, to make her pay for the wrong she had unknowingly committed. He couldn't rest, couldn't breathe, until he saw her destroyed. And so, with a cold heart and a mind filled with malice, Ethan made his vow. He swore to destroy her. The promise was more than just words. It was a dark oath that would drive him to do unspeakable things. And as he stood in front of his mirror that night, staring at the reflection of the man he had become, he knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. The storm inside him had already started to rage, and nothing, no one, could stop it now. Claire had no idea what was going on in Ethan's mind. To her, he was just another colleague, someone she interacted with daily at work. She had always treated him with respect, offering a smile when their eyes met and sharing a word of encouragement when he seemed down. She saw the best in people, perhaps too much at times. Her kindness knew no bounds, and she believed in the power of second chances, even for people like Ethan, who she didn't realize were slowly becoming consumed by darker thoughts. But life, as it often does, had a way of revealing hidden truths. It all started when Claire began to notice subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. He had always been ambitious, but recently, his ambition seemed laced with something else. There was a bitterness in his eyes whenever he looked at her, a coldness that hadn't been there before. At first, she brushed it off as nothing more than stress from work. But over time, the tension became harder to ignore. The little remarks he made, the way his eyes would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, it was all starting to feel off. Claire wasn't one to shy away from confrontation, especially when it came to things she valued. She had spent enough time in the corporate world to know when something wasn't right. It wasn't long before she realized that Ethan was no longer the man she had once known. He wasn't the friendly colleague who always made her laugh. He had become someone else, someone filled with resentment, someone who could barely hide his disdain for her. What had happened? What had she done to deserve this change? The truth, Claire would later discover, was something that would shake her to her very core. Ethan had been consumed by jealousy, fueled by a sense of betrayal that she had no idea she had caused. His envy had grown so intense, so all-encompassing, that it clouded every rational thought. He blamed her for everything that had gone wrong in his life, for his failure to achieve what he believed was rightfully his. And now, in his eyes, she was the enemy. She had stolen his promotion. She had become everything he wanted to be but could never reach, and for that, he had vowed to destroy her. But Claire was not someone who could sit idly by while the storm raged around her. She had always been strong, both in her heart and mind. She had faced struggles in her life, things that would have broken others, but she always found a way to overcome them. Her resilience was something people admired, but it was also something that set her apart. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most difficult battles were the ones you had to fight not with your fists, but with your heart. And as Ethan's behavior became increasingly erratic, Claire realized that this was a battle she would have to face, even if it meant risking everything. It was one cold afternoon when Claire made the decision that would change the course of both their lives. Ethan had cornered her in the office, his words sharp and cutting, his eyes dark with anger. He accused her of things she had never done, twisted every situation to make her seem like the villain. For a moment, Claire felt herself falter. The venom in his words struck deep, and she could feel the weight of his anger pressing down on her. But as she stood there, feeling the coldness of his rage, something inside her shifted. She refused to let this man destroy her. She refused to let his hatred win. Without thinking, Claire did something that would surprise even herself. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm yet resolute. "I don't know what's happened to you, Ethan, but I'm not the enemy here. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant to take anything from you. I'm sorry if you feel that way, but I can't allow you to continue down this path. There has to be more to life than this anger." Ethan stood frozen, staring at her, his eyes flickering with confusion. He had never expected her to respond this way. He had expected her to crumble, to apologize, to beg for mercy. But instead, she stood there, unwavering in her conviction. For a brief moment, he saw the humanity in her eyes, the kindness that he had once admired. But it was quickly replaced by the bitterness of his own heart, and he turned away. Yet, even as he walked away, something in him began to stir. Claire's words had hit him harder than he wanted to admit. She wasn't fighting him with anger or hatred. She was fighting him with compassion. She had risked everything, her reputation, her peace of mind, and her own emotional well-being, to try to reach him, to try to save him from the darkness that consumed him. Claire had no idea how much her words had affected him. But in that moment, she made a decision. She would not give up on Ethan, not because she owed him anything, but because she believed in the power of redemption. She believed that no one was beyond saving, not even someone as lost as Ethan. Her courage in the face of his hostility was the first step in a journey neither of them could have anticipated. And from that day forward, she would risk it all, not for herself, but for him. Ethan's journey to darkness had begun, but Claire's decision to risk everything for him had just begun as well. Neither of them knew it yet, but their fates were now intertwined in ways that would change them forever. And it all started with one simple, courageous choice: to reach out and offer a chance at redemption, even when the cost was everything. Ethan's life had always been a series of calculated moves, carefully planned and executed with precision. Every action, every word, every decision had been part of his strategy to climb to the top. He was driven by an overwhelming desire to succeed, to prove that he was better than anyone who had ever doubted him. But now, as he walked away from Claire that day, something inside him had shifted. Her words echoed in his mind, reverberating through every corner of his being. She had dared to reach out to him, to speak to him with such kindness, when he had treated her like an enemy. For the first time in a long while, he found himself questioning his own actions. The man who had sworn to destroy her, the man consumed by hatred and jealousy, stood at a crossroads. Deep down, Ethan knew he was lost. The anger he felt toward Claire was no longer just about the promotion or the betrayal he had convinced himself she had committed. It had grown into something darker, something deeper, that had taken root in his heart. He was angry at the world, at the people who had overlooked him, at the circumstances that had never worked in his favor. Claire had become a symbol, a target for all his unresolved frustrations. But now, after the confrontation, he was left with a gnawing sense of doubt. The words she had spoken, the quiet strength in her voice, the calm certainty that he wasn't beyond redemption, had touched something inside him that he didn't even know existed anymore. Ethan had spent years building walls around himself, convincing himself that he was better off alone, better off consumed by his ambition. He had buried his vulnerability, refusing to acknowledge the pain that had driven him for so long. But Claire's unexpected compassion had cracked those walls. The question was, what would he do with that crack? Would he let it shatter him entirely, or would he repair the damage and face the reality of his own inner turmoil? For days, Ethan couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. His work became a blur, a series of meaningless tasks that seemed irrelevant in the face of the emotional storm he was battling. His thoughts kept returning to Claire, the way she had looked at him with pity, yes, but also with an openness he didn't deserve. He couldn't comprehend it. Why would she care? Why would she reach out to someone who had only ever caused her harm? It didn't make sense, and yet there was something in her words that kept pulling him back, over and over again. Ethan tried to suppress the emotions rising within him. He told himself that he was stronger than this. He told himself that his revenge was justified, that his anger was deserved. But every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a man he didn't recognize. The man he had been before Claire. Cold, detached, ruthless, seemed like a stranger now. The anger, the bitterness, had consumed him to the point where he no longer knew who he was underneath it all. Was he just a product of his circumstances? Was he doomed to be the person he had become, or could he change? It was on one of these sleepless nights that Ethan found himself standing at the window of his apartment, staring out at the city. The lights flickered below, but his mind was a darkened void. He was lost, adrift in a sea of emotions he couldn't control. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own loneliness. The pursuit of success, the need to destroy everything in his path, had isolated him. He had pushed away friends, family, colleagues, all in the name of ambition. And now, as he stood alone in his apartment, he realized just how empty his life had become. There was no one left to turn to. Not even Claire, who had offered him something he could never have imagined. a chance to be seen for who he truly was, not the monster he had created in his mind. The struggle inside Ethan was real, and it was tearing him apart. His anger screamed for revenge, urging him to finish what he had started, to tear Claire down and watch her crumble. But a quieter voice inside him, one that had been buried for so long, began to speak up. It was the voice of the man he had once been, the man who had been capable of kindness, of compassion. It was the voice of the man who had been drawn to Claire in the first place, before resentment and jealousy clouded his judgment. That voice reminded him of what he could have if he chose to let go of his anger. A life of connection, of understanding, of redemption. Ethan found himself at war with himself. The darkness inside him fought against the possibility of change, pushing him toward more destructive thoughts. But deep down, he knew that Claire had shown him something important, something that had the potential to heal him, if he allowed it. The battle was no longer just between him and her. It was a battle within his own soul. He had a choice to make: continue down the path of vengeance and bitterness, or take a chance on something that could change his life forever. In the quiet moments before dawn, Ethan made a decision. It was a decision born not out of anger, but of the faintest hope he had for redemption. He didn't know where this path would lead him, or if it would even be possible to undo the damage he had done. But one thing was certain: he couldn't continue to live in the darkness he had created. And so, with a deep breath and a heavy heart, Ethan made the first step toward the unknown. He would reach out to Claire. He didn't know how to fix everything, but he knew that this battle was one he couldn't fight alone anymore. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to believe in the possibility of change. The days that followed were some of the most difficult and transformative of Ethan's life. It was as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But in its place, there was a sense of uncertainty, a fear of what might come next. He had reached the point of no return. His decision to change, to seek redemption, meant facing the consequences of his past actions. It wasn't going to be easy. The anger that had defined him for so long still lurked in the corners of his mind, ready to consume him again at any moment. But now, for the first time, he had a sense of clarity. He knew what he had to do. Ethan spent days wrestling with his emotions, trying to find the right words to say to Claire. He had hurt her, destroyed her peace of mind with his words and actions, and he couldn't simply undo the damage. Yet, deep inside, he knew that the only way to begin healing was to take responsibility for what he had done. He couldn't let the fear of rejection or the weight of his past prevent him from reaching out. Claire had given him the chance to see himself for who he truly was, and now it was up to him to decide who he would become. One evening, after hours of contemplation, Ethan finally gathered the courage to call Claire. His hand shook as he dialed her number, his heart racing in his chest. He had no idea how she would respond. Would she even answer? Would she want to hear from him after everything he had done? The phone rang, and with each passing second, his anxiety grew. But then, to his surprise, Claire picked up. Her voice was calm, though there was a slight hesitation in it, as if she, too, had been wondering what this call would mean. "Ethan," she said, her tone soft but guarded. "Is everything okay?" Her words hit him like a wave, and for a moment, he was speechless. How could he explain the chaos inside him? How could he tell her that he had been consumed by jealousy, anger, and bitterness, and that it had taken her reaching out to him for him to see the error of his ways? "Claire, I don't know how to start," Ethan said, his voice strained. "I just want to say, I've been a fool. I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, and I need you to know that I regret everything. I let my anger control me, and I turned on you when you never deserved any of it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Ethan thought Claire might hang up. But then, her voice broke through the silence, gentle and understanding. "I've been waiting for you to say that, Ethan," she replied, her voice steady but kind. "I know you've been struggling, and I know it's not easy to admit when we're wrong, but I've always believed in the good in people, even when they've hurt me. And I'm glad you're finally seeing that too." The warmth in her words filled Ethan with a sense of relief that he hadn't felt in years. Her forgiveness was a gift he never expected, and it hit him harder than any blow could. But it wasn't just her forgiveness that struck him. It was the realization that Claire had always seen something in him that he had never seen in himself. Despite everything, she had believed that he was capable of change. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm asking for it anyway. I've made so many mistakes, and I've hurt so many people, but I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be better. For you, for me, for everyone I've let down." There was a long silence, and then Claire spoke again. "Ethan, you've already taken the first step, and that's the hardest one. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise that I'll be here, if you really want to change." Ethan's heart swelled with gratitude. He had expected rejection, and instead, he had found understanding. He had expected anger, but instead, Claire had offered him the possibility of redemption. In that moment, Ethan realized that he wasn't just seeking her forgiveness. He was also seeking his own redemption. And that was a path he would walk, no matter how long it took. The decision wasn't just about repairing the damage he had done to Claire. It was about rebuilding himself from the inside out. It would require him to confront the darkness within, to let go of the anger that had defined him for so long. But now, for the first time in his life, he had hope. He had something to live for beyond success and revenge. As the conversation drew to a close, Ethan felt something shift inside him. It was as though the storm that had been raging inside him for years had finally started to calm. The weight that had held him down, the anger and the resentment, began to loosen its grip, and in its place, a new sense of clarity emerged. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would take him, or how long it would take to truly heal. But for the first time, he felt like he was walking in the right direction. "Thank you, Claire," Ethan said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for believing in me. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Claire said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Take it one day at a time, Ethan. That's all you can do." With those words, the conversation ended, but Ethan knew that it was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A chapter where he would fight for his own redemption, for the chance to be the person Claire believed he could be. As he put the phone down, he looked out the window once again. But this time, the city didn't feel so dark. The lights below seemed brighter, the air felt lighter. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was ready to move forward, one step at a time, one choice at a time.